which is just this past week, news headlines described a massive study of 99 million people who received the COVID vaccine. The Daily Mail headline says it all. Largest COVID vaccine study ever finds shots are linked to small increased risk of neurological, blood, and heart disorders. And it adds on to the title, but they are still extremely rare. Every article about the study went out of its way to describe the injuries as rare. But what does rare actually mean? First slide. This is the graph that was in the Daily Mail's article. In terms of this study, what they're saying is rare includes a 3.78 times risk of swelling in the brain and spinal cord. This means you are increasing your risk of brain and spinal swelling by 378% over someone who didn't get the vaccine. There was also a 2.86 times risk of Guillain-Barre syndrome, which is a paralysis, 6.10 times risk of myocarditis, and a 6.91x risk of pericarditis, swelling of the heart issues. The question no one in the media seems to be asking, I think, is if each of these potential injuries is rare, is it still rare when you add them all together? Take the Moderna vaccine, for example. In the standard 3-shot regimen, based on this study, a person is increasing their risk of brain and spinal swelling by 378% with the first shot. They're also adding a 348% risk of myocarditis with that same first shot, a 610% increase of myocarditis with the second shot, and another 201% increased risk of myocarditis with the third shot. And these are just the adverse events that were the focus of the study. We're talking about cancer and all sorts of other things that we should be looking at. When the CDC was creating the vSafe app to track the health outcomes of the first 10 million people who received the COVID vaccine, they had a list of adverse events of special interest. These were injuries that the CDC had reason to believe could be caused by the COVID vaccine. That list includes acute myocardial infarction, anaphylaxis, coagulopathy, death, Guillain-Barre syndrome, Kawasaki's disease, multisystem inflammatory disease, narcolepsy, seizures, convulsions, stroke, and transverse myelitis. Now let's just assume that all of these issues are rare, and since we know that the rare is currently being described, at least in this study, as anything between a 200% increase to a nearly 700% increased risk, then what is the actual risk when you add all these potential adverse outcomes together? Further still, how high is the risk when you multiply all of these risks by 5 doses of the COVID vaccine? Are we still in the ballpark of rare? Now imagine multiplying all of these known risks by 72 doses. Now you've just considered the amount of risk that every child is facing with the CDC recommended schedule. The CDC childhood schedule has been the focus of my nonprofit ICANN's work since the end of 2016 when it was founded. Through FOIA requests and lawsuits against our regulatory agencies, we've uncovered many inconvenient truths. Perhaps the most significant finding is that none of the 14 routine vaccines on the CDC recommended schedule, which are delivered in approximately 72 doses, was ever put through a long-term, double-blind, placebo-based safety trial prior to licensure. Since this type of trial is really the only way to establish that a pharmaceutical product is safe, it is misinformation to state that the vaccines are safe. We have skipped the study that would allow you to make that statement scientifically. Most people don't realize that there's a list of known side effects on the information sheet provided with every vaccine that is shipped. Here is just a partial list of printed adverse events for just one of the hepatitis B vaccines, Engerix B. Here are the side effects: herpes zoster, meningitis, thrombocytopenia, anaphylaxis, hypersensitivity syndrome, arthralgia, arthritis, urticaria, erythema multiforme, encephalopathy, swelling of the brain, just like the COVID vaccine, multiple sclerosis, neuritis, hyposthesia, paresthesia, Guillain-Barre syndrome, paralysis, Bell's palsy, optic neuritis, paralysis, paresis, seizures, syncope, transverse myelitis, conjunctivitis, keratitis, tinnitus, vertigo, tachycardia, apnea, bronchospasms, including asthma-like symptoms, dyspepsia, alopecia, angioedema, eczema, and Stevens-Johnson syndrome. That's just one vaccine. That vaccine manufacturer has all these side effects in the warning list because why? It is stipulated by the FDA that there is a reasonable belief that they are causally related to the vaccine. That's why they're there. They're not adding them just because they think they should, because they have to. The warning label lists nearly 50 potential side effects, many of them serious, and that is just the first vaccine given to a baby on their first day of life. By the way, the safety study for that hepatitis B vaccine was only 4 days long and had no placebo comparator. That is not science, that's insanity. We currently have a lawsuit trying to have that vaccine removed until they do proper safety testing. Every one of the childhood vaccines has a similar list of side effects. And though they are considered rare, how rare is it when you multiply roughly 50 potential side effects 72 times, which is the total number of doses given to a child by the time they're 18? The revelations from the recent study of the COVID vaccine explains what we have been saying for years. Vaccines are not completely safe. And those side effects are rare. What happens when you add them all together? Perhaps it looks like this. Last slide. This is what Brian Hooker is talking about. In the 1980s, when we were giving 11 doses of about 3 vaccines, the chronic illness rate, which includes neurological and autoimmune disease, was 12.8%. Once we passed the 1986 Act and we had the gold rush of vaccines, it exploded to 53 doses. As I said, 72, that's 53 shots, 72 doses. You watch the chronic illness rate, neurological and autoimmune disease, skyrocket to 54% of our children. And by the way, that study was finished up in 2011, 2012. We have no idea since then how bad this has gotten. But what you were looking right at there is the greatest decline in public health in human history. Never have we watched that many children in just a few decades have their immune system start fighting their own bodies and swelling brains. And when you look at the numbers that Brian Hooker just showed you, they match exactly what we're seeing them call rare in this COVID study. 5 times the rate of neurological disorders. Vax versus unvaxxed showing about 4 times the rate of autism in people that got the vaccine compared to those that don't. So it's rare, but it's possible, and it's real. And when we look at those rare numbers stacked up, especially with autism, we're now at 1 in 45. That's conservative. Many say 1 in 35 children is being diagnosed with autism, roughly 1 in 20 to 24 boys. Is that still rare? Sure. Sure, it's just a couple per 100. But what we can never say again after this study and what we all now know is that vaccine injury isn't happening. That's a lie. It is. And we all have a threshold, and we should figure out what that threshold is, because millions of children are being injured all the way around the world.
Nothing to see here, right?
Nothing to see here.
Can't